Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here to present our ongoing research in this wonderful meeting, next time, hopefully face-to-face. And I would like to thank the organizers to giving us the opportunity to present it. So this presentation results from one of the ongoing projects of the Textiles, Trade and Taste Portugal and the World TTT Group, which is a network that aspires to bring new synergies to the field of textile studies by promoting different connections and interdisciplinary approaches involving art history, materials, science, and conservation. We had done several activities around the country, including the city of Castelo Branco, where we talked about the embroideries of Castelo Branco, one of many Portuguese textiles legacies. Castelo Branco quilts are bedspreads embroidered in natural silk on linen, where predominates what is now called the Castelo Branco Embroidery stitch. Before the 40s, this same stitch was called broad stitch, and as the silk threads were loosely twisted, the embroidery was also known as loose embroidery. That embroidery stitch, the motifs and the compositions in which is it used, as well as the exclusive use of natural silk, give the Castelo Branco embroidery its richness and specific characteristics unique in Portuguese embroidery. This is further underlined by a decorative grammar, which for the most part has been defined in the 18th century. However, although the expression Castelo Branco bedspreads is commonly used referring to a wide range of pieces, at the present state of our knowledge, it is not yet possible to determine precisely which of these bedspreads were actually produced in Castelo Branco region. For now, it is already possible to exclude a group of pieces that for the richness of their embroidery and the quality of their design and patterns are unlikely to have been made in a region so distant from large urban centers. These pieces have all the characteristics of luxury goods usually associated to nobility and clergy, the kind of bedspreads that can only be explained through the proximity to the court, to a rich court. These large, sumptuous pieces feature a very specific embroidery, stitch remarkable for the difficulty in its execution and for the fact that it can only be found in Portugal in embroideries from the late 17th century and possible the early 18th century. This period corresponds to the reign of Pedro II, a time of increasing prosperity following to the end of the War of Restoration, and gold started coming from Brazil. So since 2008, this group of bedspreads is therefore considered to have been made in Lisbon. There is another larger group of bedspreads that almost certainly may have originated in Castelo Branco and nearby areas. These are smaller quilts with centers outlined by rebos showing burns perched on plants that come out of pots. It is also relatively frequent to find pairs of girls or a single girl, and all dressed in the fashion of the 18th century. These bedspreads are also characteristically featured the entire field decorated with open carnations. The design of these bedspreads is almost always quite slipshod, and the symmetry is more apparent than real. For a long time, they were called popular as opposed to the other so-called estate bedspreads. Their quasi-naive look and the abundance of their occurrence in Castelo Branco are reasonable grounds to find them consistent with local manufacturing. And finally, there is a third group of bedspreads about which it is not possible to have an informed opinion about their origin. Carefully made with a good design and varied patterns, they almost always have centers in the shape of a platter. Although birds may appear, their decoration consists almost entirely of flowers of various shapes, lotus and papyrus flowers being among the most impressive ones. Carnations always present an erudite design, the open carnations, so characteristic of the previous group never appear. But how is it that more than 80 years after a deliberate operation with the object of reviving the production of Castelo Branco embroidery, we still know so little about the production that occurred in the 18th century? To understand this, we must look into how Castelo Branco became aware of this remarkable textile heritage. The expression Castelo Branco bedspreads was coined in 1891 by António Roxo. he noticed the extraordinary set of quilts existing in the city as he followed very closely the visits of the King Dom Carlos and the Queen Dona Amélia to Castelo Branco. Antonio Roxo vividly reports all the aspects of that visit, not forgetting to mention the bedspreads that adorned the balconies and windows of the streets where the kings passed and were enthusiastically acclaimed. The palace where they stayed was equally adorned with bedspreads that caught the attention of the queen, who wanted to know their origin. Many years later, in 1929, the city of Castelo Branco was again presented with evidence of its rich textile heritage. This happened during the 4th Congresso Verão, when Julian Tunes, a young teacher of needlework, presented a paper titled Lace Work and Embroidery in the Beira Provinces. In her communication, she described for the first time the organization of the various types of drawings, the stitches and colors of Castelo Branco bedspreads. Julian Tunes ended her communication by emphatically appealing to the need for and importance of their revival. At the time, embroidery in loosened silk on linen was still being done both in a learning context in the city schools and in a domestic context as a leisure activity for the women of a higher social status. However, according to Julian Tunes, the embroidery was in most cases of poor quality. This situation remained until 1939, when Father José Ribeiro Cardoso, at the time president of the Provincial Council of Beira Baixa, announced that to mark the commemorations of the double centennial, there will be an exhibition of Castelo Branco bedspreads, and that the Provincial Council will set up an embroidery school. A commission presided by Eurico de Salgiana, who was nominated to make an inventory of the bedspreads throughout the province and also to publish an album with the colors and drawings of the quilts. Around the same time, Salgiana and Luís Chaves had spent a month traveling all around Beira Baixa. Their purpose was to prepare a pavilion dedicated to the ethnography of continental Portugal for the Portuguese World Exhibition in Lisbon, 1940. For Salgiana, it was also an opportunity to prepare the bedspreads exhibition, which, although planned for 1940, only took place in 41. Thus, in 39, Salgiana published an article in which he presented his theories about the origin and meaning of Castelo Branco bedspreads. His text corresponds, in fact, to a vision shared with Luís Chaves, who in 1940 also published an extensive article entitled The Bedspreads of Castelo Branco. In their opinion, the bedspreads were embroidered by single young women working with linen and silk of their own production. Both are founders of a mythology associated with bedspreads, which are understood as a symbol of a woman's nuptials, used only once on her wedding day, and then kept in the deepest part of her trunks. Their decoration was presented as a symbolic system that mirrored the prevailing patriarchal values and the specific vision of the family pushed forward by the political regime at the time. These explanations were uncritically accepted and have ever since been used to promote the embroidery of Castelo Branco. The 1941 exhibition included almost 100 antique and linen bedspreads from all over Beira Baixa province and contributed to create a very strong image of Castelo Branco bedspreads, which became the defining icon of the city. The exhibition was both a public and critical success, to such an extent that about a quarter of the exhibits was shown in Lisbon the following year. But unfortunately, there are no inventory sheets of the bedspreads presents in 1941 exhibition. The only information that remains from this unique moment is the perception that those bedspreads came from all over the province of Beira Baixa. However, we do have some information about the bedspreads that were sent to the exhibition in Lisbon the following year. We know their places of origin, the names of their owners, and in some instances, there are even some short descriptions that allow us to identify them. This information allows us to conclude that at the time, all the silk embroidery bedspreads were deemed to be from Castelo Branco, despite their diversity in terms of size, patterns, quality of design, and stitches used. Both the local elite of Castelo Branco and the national elites in Lisbon became aware of that amazing, rich heritage, not realizing the incoherence of the collection, nor the fraud of the discourse that explained the bedspreads. So we can state that there are two periods in which embroidery of Castelo Branco was produced. The first period would have occurred during the 18th century. The second period of the workshop production starts in the beginning of the 40s. During this second phase, a production of silk embroidery bedspreads found in the region were considered to have been produced there, which in the present state of research, we know it's not to be true. Then critical knowledge about the plural corpus of quilts mean that all of them were considered appropriate models for the designs that the new production required, including using designs and patterns from quilts made in Lisbon, as well as motifs of various types mixed together. The intervention that led to the relaunch of production was also inexact in the use of colors, not taking into account the degradation that original colors can suffer over time. The concept of certification applied to artisanal products is not an easy nor obvious task. There are products related to a region that rely on specific location factors to explain their occurrence and to supply them with historical weight and definition. It is the passing of time which explains and gives a consistency to those products whose image has become a symbol of a certain location or region. Such is the case of the embroidery of Castelo Branco, which has long identified the region where it occurs. To certify an artisanal production of any kind implies an in-depth study of its characteristics. This study should not only clarify the issues concerning its occurrence and development in a certain region, but should also define and characterize the raw materials, the patterns, and decorative vocabulary of the production in question. Finally, the research has to take in consideration and define the parameters of innovation, which each product can potentially attain without jeopardizing, undoing, or losing its essence, thereby maintaining its identity while evolving. The results of this kind of research allow for the elaboration of what is known as a notebook of specifications, a document that presents the main points arising from the overall investigation and contains all the elements identifying a certain production. It has therefore become a reference of what is and what is not acceptable, and what is considered certifiable. One of the problems in the characterization of Castelo Branco embroidery has to do with color. In fact, the chromatic palette that is being used does not respect the true colors used in the past, which came to us faded, altered by the action of light. To know what were the original colors, it's important issue in order to include them in the notebook of specifications. Moreover, the study of color can also provide valuable indications as to the location where bedspreads were produced, possible even the definition workshops clusters. It was to solve these questions that Castelo Branco Embroidery project was conceived. In order to study the thread's original colors, some bedspreads were chosen according to the following criteria. Firstly, a group of bedspreads which at present are thought to have been made in around Castelo Branco. It is a group of 8 pieces, which may have been embroidery or not in different workshops. Another group of bedspreads were chosen because they show a very special use of blue color. Actually, blue is one of the most misused colors in the transposition of the chromatic palette from antique to modern bedspreads, a situation that needs to be clarified. For the same reason, some bedspreads were chosen in which the shades of dark reds, crimson, and purple were used. And finally, some were chosen in order to find why some colors are so vivid and others so faded. In this sense, during our first field mission to Viseu and Castelo Branco, a set of bedspreads from Casa Museu Almeida Moreira and from Museu Francisco Tavares Proença Jr., and also from a private collector, Dr. Catarina David, corresponding to previous criteria, were directly observed with naked eye and with digital microscope. And samples of fibers from the embroideries and from the support fabric were collected to be analyzed in José Figueiredo laboratory by microscope and HPLC VAD, but just in the near future. So far, a total of 13 bedspreads are being analyzed, 5 from the Casa Museu Almeida Moreira, 6 from Museu Tavares Proença Jr., and 2 from the private collection. The results are still under investigation because we are just starting the analytical research due to the big delays caused mainly by the pandemic. The unique history of embroidery of Castelo Branco demands our best efforts in order to carry on its magnificent production. It makes perfect sense to make exact replicas of older pieces with bright colors and to incorporate a contemporary vocabulary into this kind of production. However, it does not make any sense to keep using an incoherent and inexact decorative program for which there is no foundation. And finally, the authors would like to thank Dr. Catarina David for her kindness by showing her pieces and allowing us to take samples, Dr. Sandra Alves from Casa Museu Almeida Moreira, and Julia Mendonça Bispo from Museu Francisco Tavares Proença Jr., who organized the visits in each museum, and to the other members of the project, and finally the financial support of Câmara Municipal de Castelo Branco, CHAM, and Nova University. And that's it.